Alright, so in this video, I want to take a look at Matthew chapters 24 and Matthew chapter 25 and look at these verses in their context to determine what's being spoken about in Matthew 25 between verses 31 all the way down to the end of the chapter. Basically the goat and sheep judgment. But before we get to that, all right, I want to begin in Matthew chapter 24. All right, so if we go back, we can see that in verse 1, it says, Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to shew him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And he sat upon the Mount of Olives. The disciples came unto him privately. So he's speaking to his disciples, and he's speaking to them privately. And it says, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? Referring back to what Jesus spoke about in the temple in the previous verses. And what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? The last part's key, the end of the world. So this is not talking about the rapture. It's talking about the end of the world. The disciples at this time, they didn't know anything about the rapture. That wasn't revealed yet to them. So what they were looking forward to was the millennial kingdom, the end of the world. All right, so Matthew 24, all right, again, it's talking about the second coming of Christ. And if we look, I'm not going to read the whole passage just for the sake of time. I'm trying to keep the video short, but we'll see how I do with that. But if we go down to verse 36, it says, But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. All right, so we don't know when the end of the world is going to be. We don't know when that time is coming. All right. All right, so Jesus, he's telling his disciples, all right, to be ready. All right, that's what this is all about. He's getting his disciples to be ready for that day. Right? And we get that in verses 44 and 45. He says, Therefore, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. So he's telling his disciples again to be ready. All right. Now, if we go forward a little bit, we see those same words mentioned in Matthew 25. All right, verse 10. And this is the parable of the 10 virgins, which I'll explain in a little bit, but I just want to show you in verse 10. It says, And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. So we have two groups of people, and again, I'll explain this more in depth in a little bit, but we have two groups of people, right? We got the 5 virgins who had oil in their lamps, and we have the 5 virgins who did not have oil in their lamps. So one group was ready, those who had the oil in their lamp, and the other group was not. All right, so that's what the context is concerning these chapters. Jesus is telling his disciples to be ready for that time. All right, and this parable right here, the 10 virgins, it's a parallel parable. Sorry, it's a bundle of words there with the previous chapter. All right, so, and this is where we'll begin. We'll kind of go straight through instead of jumping back and forth. All right, but if we look at Matthew chapter 24 and we look at verses 43, all right, down to 51, it says, But know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. So if he knew the time that, the thief was coming, he would have been ready. All right? Verse 44, therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? Blessed is the servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. Verse 48, and if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my Lord delayeth his coming, right? So he's not being wise here. He thinks he's going to come at another time, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants. So he's not doing what God called him to do, like the wise servant. He's being unwise. And shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken. The Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, so he's not ready, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. All right, so just like the 5 virgins who had oil in their lamp, they were ready, right? They did the one thing that God told them to do. The parable of the 5 virgins. They believed the gospel. Right? They had oil in their lamps. Right? They were walking in the light. And if we look at John chapter 12, verse 46, let's just go there real quick. So it's probably the only verse I turn to, because it's talking about light. Right? The 5 virgins who had oil in their lamp, they had light, obviously. If we look at John chapter 12, verse 46, he says, I am come a light into the world, that whosoever believeth on me should not abide in darkness. So those wise virgins who had oil in their lamp, they believed the gospel. They were not abiding in darkness. Okay? So going back to where we were now. All right, so so far, Jesus is telling his disciples about the end of the world, the things that are going to come, all right, the birth pains, and he uses a parable to teach the people, right, that they need to be ready. All right, and so he used the first one, the wise servant, and then he just showed how the unwise servant wasn't ready. He was smiting his fellow servants. And then we get into chapter 25, and I think it's verses 1 through 13. All right, and so notice how the end of the parable of the 10 virgins ends. It says, watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. So he's ending that parable by emphasizing and stressing the importance of being ready for that day. All right. And if we continue on, let's see. All right. Let's see. I don't think I want to. All right. So now if we get to the next part of Matthew chapter 25, we have another parable. But before we get into it, so far the parables, if you look at them, it's dividing people up into 2 groups: those who are ready, meaning those who are saved, and those who are unsaved, and because they weren't ready. Right? The one group who saved, they did what God told them to do. Right? They obeyed. The unsaved group, they didn't obey. They did whatever they wanted to do. So now we get into this third parable, and it's important to keep in mind that a person who's saved, they cannot lose their salvation. Right? We let clear scripture interpret unclear scripture. So we have 3 servants. I'm not going to read everything, but you can pause the screen and read the verses 14, all the way down. I'll scroll down a little bit. If you want to pause the screen, you can. But just for the sake of time and to keep the video hopefully relatively short, all right, I'm going to just kind of explain the passages. All right. So with the parable of the talents, let me scroll back up here a little bit. All right. So this is the third parable in this series of parables. And so, like I said, it's important to keep in mind that that a person cannot lose their salvation. So we have 3 servants, and they're given talents according to their ability. So the first 2, they gained more talents, and the third servant, he didn't produce anything. So what does that tell us? Well, some people, they invest in the gospel and they get a return on it, while others, they kind of like bury it in the ground and they do nothing with it. And so, looking at this parable in light of the previous 2, it's reasonable to conclude the wicked, slothful servant is unsaved. Yes, I said that right. The wicked, slothful servant is unsaved. And I'll explain in just a minute, but let me continue on with my train of thought. He did nothing with the talent, indicating that he did not do what he was supposed to do. All right. Now, the 5 foolish virgins, they did what they were supposed to do.